The invitation to David's MBA graduation had arrived with a handwritten note. "Hope you can make it, sis." Would mean a lot to have family there for my valedictorian speech. I'd almost declined. Saturday afternoons were precious in my world, and I had 3 board meetings scheduled for Monday that required preparation. But guilt won out. Despite everything, David was still my brother. So here I sat in the 3rd row of Northwestern's Kellogg School auditorium, wearing a simple black dress and watching my older brother bask in what he clearly considered the pinnacle of academic achievement. Around me, families beamed with pride as their newly minted MBAs prepared to conquer the business world. The energy was infectious, even if I found the whole ceremony a bit quaint. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dean Morrison announced from the podium, "it's my pleasure to introduce this year's valedictorian, David Vasquez, who will speak on behalf of the graduating class." I clapped politely as David strode to the microphone, resplendent in his cap and gown, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his path to success. At 32, he'd spent the last 2 years earning his MBA after a successful run in corporate finance, and today represented his triumphant return to what he called the family tradition of excellence. The family tradition, if only he knew. "Thank you, Dean Morrison," David began, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium. "Fellow graduates, faculty, and families, today marks not just the end of our academic journey, but the beginning of our professional legacy." His eyes found our family section, where Mom and Dad sat beaming with pride. Mom had tears in her eyes. Her firstborn son, the golden child, finally achieving the business credentials she'd always dreamed of for her children. As I look out at this audience, David continued, "I'm reminded that success isn't just individual, it's generational. It's about building on the foundations our families have laid and reaching even greater heights." Greater heights. I almost smiled at the irony. "In my own family," David said, his voice warming as he settled into his theme, "I've been blessed to see multiple examples of what dedication and hard work can achieve. My father built a successful accounting practice from nothing. My mother transformed a small catering business into the premier event planning company in the city." The audience murmured appreciatively. Success stories always played well at graduation ceremonies. And I have to acknowledge my sister Alina, who's here today. David gestured toward our section, and I felt hundreds of eyes turn my way. While she's chosen a more unconventional path, she represents the entrepreneurial spirit that runs in our family. Unconventional path. That was David's diplomatic way of describing what he saw as my refusal to get a real job after dropping out of my PhD program 5 years ago. Alina reminds us that not all success looks the same, David continued, his tone suggesting this was a lesson he generously learned to accept. Sometimes the most important thing is simply following your passion, even if it doesn't lead to traditional measures of achievement. Following my passion. I suppose that was one way to describe building a biotechnology empire that had revolutionized cancer treatment and made me one of the youngest billionaires in healthcare. "But what I've learned from my family," David said, his voice gaining momentum, "is that true success requires discipline, strategic thinking, and the courage to pursue excellence through established channels of achievement." Established channels, like business school, like the corporate finance track he'd been following since college, like the predetermined path that led to predictable success in predictable ways. "Our family has many success stories," David announced, his voice rising with conviction. "Well, most of us do." The pause that followed was deliberate, and I felt the weight of it. In one carefully constructed sentence, my brother had managed to celebrate family achievement while subtly excluding me from that narrative. The message was clear. While the rest of the family had succeeded through traditional means, Alina remained the cautionary tale about what happened when you abandoned conventional wisdom. I should have been angry. Instead, I was fascinated by the precision of his dismissal. The point is, David continued, seamlessly moving past his casual demolition of my life choices, we each have the power to write our own success story. But that story is most powerful when it builds on proven principles of business excellence, strategic planning, and measurable achievement. Measurable achievement. Like the $4.7 billion valuation of my company, Vitagen Therapeutics. Like the 3 FDA-approved treatments that had extended the lives of over 100,000 cancer patients. Like the Nobel Prize Committee's decision to nominate me for my work in personalized gene therapy. But I suppose those weren't the kind of measurements David had in mind. As we leave here today, David said, building toward his conclusion, let's remember that true success isn't just about personal fulfillment. It's about creating value that others can recognize, respect, and reward. It's about building careers that make our families proud and contribute meaningfully to society. Contribute meaningfully to society. I thought about the letter I'd received last week from a mother in Ohio whose 6-year-old daughter was cancer-free thanks to treatments developed in my lab. Apparently, that kind of contribution didn't count. So congratulations, class of 2024. David finished, his voice ringing with triumph. You've earned your place among the business leaders of tomorrow. Now go out there and show the world what real success looks like. The applause was thunderous. David had delivered exactly the kind of speech these ceremonies demanded, inspirational, aspirational, and just personal enough to feel authentic. As he returned to his seat, Mom was openly crying with pride, and Dad was already pulling out his phone to take pictures. I clapped along with everyone else, genuinely impressed by David's presentation skills, even as I marveled at his ability to reduce my entire existence to a footnote about unconventional choices. Wasn't that wonderful? Mom whispered to me as the applause died down. David has such a gift for speaking. He really does, I agreed. Very polished. And so thoughtful to mention you, Dad added, leaning over. I know it means a lot that he acknowledged your efforts. My efforts. Even my parents had adopted David's diplomatic language for describing what they saw as my prolonged quarter-life crisis. Dean Morrison returned to the podium. Thank you, David, for those inspiring words. Before we move to the conferring of degrees, I have a few special acknowledgments to make. The audience settled back into their seats, expecting the usual recognition of major donors and distinguished alumni. First, I'd like to recognize the generosity that makes our programs possible, Dean Morrison began. This year has been particularly remarkable for the support we've received from our alumni and friends of the school. He paused to consult his notes, and I found myself checking my phone. 3 missed calls from my CFO, probably about the quarterly earnings announcement we had scheduled for Monday. Vitagen was about to report revenue growth of 340% year-over-year, driven primarily by our breakthrough lymphoma treatment. I'm particularly pleased to announce, Dean Morrison continued, that we've received the largest single donation in Northwestern Business School history. A murmur of interest rippled through the audience. Large donations at graduation ceremonies were always good theater. This extraordinary gift will fund the new Center for Biomedical Innovation and Entrepreneurship, providing resources for students interested in the intersection of business and life sciences. Biomedical innovation. I'd been wondering when they'd announce that. The donor's vision is to create a pipeline for the next generation of entrepreneurs who want to use business principles to solve humanity's greatest health challenges. I watched David shift in his seat, probably calculating how much money someone would need to make that kind of donation to his business school. His corporate finance background would be running the numbers. Major university naming rights typically started at 8 figures. This gift represents not just financial support, Dean Morrison said, but a commitment to bridging the gap between academic research and real-world application. Real-world application. Exactly what I'd had in mind when I'd written the check 6 months ago. Before we continue with today's ceremony, Dean Morrison announced, I'd like to recognize our benefactor, who I'm delighted to say is here with us today. I felt my phone buzz with another call from my CFO. Whatever it was would have to wait. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Ms. Elena Vasquez, founder and CEO of Vitagen Therapeutics, whose vision and generosity have made the new Center for Biomedical Innovation possible. The silence that followed was profound. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes turning toward me as Dean Morrison continued speaking, but all I could focus on was the expression on David's face. His confident smile had frozen, then slowly collapsed into something between confusion and shock. Ms. Vasquez's company has revolutionized cancer treatment through personalized gene therapy. Dean Morrison continued, oblivious to the family drama unfolding in the third row. Under her leadership, Vitagen has grown from a startup in her garage to one of the most valuable biotechnology companies in the world. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's phone slipped from his fingers. David looked like someone had just told him gravity had been canceled. At 31 years old, Ms. Vasquez represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we'd hope to foster through this new center. Her work has saved thousands of lives while building a company now valued at over $4.7 billion. The number hit the audience like a physical force. $4.7 billion. From the woman they just heard described as following an unconventional path. Would you please stand, Ms. Vasquez, so we can properly thank you for this incredible gift? I had 2 choices: remain seated and pretend this wasn't happening, or stand up and own the moment that was about to change everything between me and my family forever. I stood. The applause started slowly, then built to something approaching a roar. Around me, parents and graduates were craning their necks to get a better look at the young woman who'd just been revealed as one of the most successful biotechnology entrepreneurs in the world. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my family. Mom had tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of pride anymore. They were tears of shock and confusion. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. And David looked like someone had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his perfect graduation day. Ms. Vasquez has also agreed to deliver the keynote address at our annual entrepreneurship conference next month. Dean Morrison continued, where she'll share insights from her remarkable journey building Vitagen from concept to global impact. Global impact. The phrase hung in the air as I slowly sat back down, the applause finally fading. Dean Morrison smoothly transitioned back to the ceremony, but I could feel the energy in the room had completely changed. The carefully orchestrated celebration of traditional business success had been upended by the revelation that the most successful person in the auditorium was the one who'd been dismissed as following an unconventional path. David was staring straight ahead, no longer making eye contact with our family section. His triumph moment had been completely overshadowed by the discovery that his sister, the sister he just publicly described as choosing passion over achievement, was actually more successful than anyone in his graduating class would likely ever become. Elena, Mom whispered, her voice shaky. Is this true? Are you really the founder of Vitagen Therapeutics? Yes. But how? When did you? I started the company 5 years ago, right after I left the PhD program. 5 years ago, Dad repeated slowly. You've been running $1 billion company for 5 years. $4.7 billion as of last quarter's valuation. The numbers were too big for them to process immediately. I watched my parents try to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew, the one who disappointed them by dropping out of graduate school and pursuing some vague entrepreneurial dream, with the woman who'd just been recognized as one of the most successful biotechnology executives in the world. But why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, her voice barely audible. It was a fair question, and the answer was complicated. Because every time I tried to explain what I was building, you seemed to think I was being unrealistic. Remember when I mentioned the lab space I was renting? You worried I was spending money I couldn't afford. When I talked about the patent applications, you asked if I was sure biotechnology was a stable career path. Mom winced. We were trying to be practical. I know. But your version of practical didn't include the possibility that I might actually succeed at something that didn't look like traditional success. Dad was still staring at me in shock. Alina, when you said you were working on medical research, I meant I was developing revolutionary cancer treatments that have now been approved by the FDA and are being used in hospitals worldwide. And when you said you were consulting for pharmaceutical companies, I meant they were licensing technology developed in my labs. The apartment downtown that we thought was too expensive for someone without a steady income is a penthouse I bought for $4.2 million cash. Though I also owned the building, the revelations were coming too fast for them to absorb. With each answer, the gap between their perception of my life and the reality of my achievements grew wider. The reason you could never come to family dinners was because I was usually traveling. Board meetings in Switzerland, conferences in Japan, meetings with government regulators in D.C. And when we worried about your retirement savings, I was busy becoming one of the youngest female billionaires in the biotech sector. David finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. Alina, are you telling me that while I was in business school learning about entrepreneurship, you were actually building one of the most successful startups in the country? I don't know about most successful, but yes, that's essentially correct. And the unconventional path I just described to this entire audience led to me revolutionizing cancer treatment and saving thousands of lives, while making you worth more money than everyone in this auditorium combined. Money was never the point, David. Saving lives was the point. The money just happened to come with it. The ceremony continued around us, but our family was locked in its own private revelation. Degrees were being conferred, photos were being taken, and futures were being celebrated, but none of us were paying attention anymore. Alina, Dad said slowly, I need to understand something. When you dropped out of the PhD program, we thought you were giving up on your potential. I was realizing my potential, just not in the way you expected. But you let us think you were struggling. You let us worry. Because every time I tried to share what I was actually doing, you seemed to think I was being naive or unrealistic. It was easier to let you think I was still figuring things out than to argue about whether my goals were achievable. Mom was shaking her head slowly. The sleepless nights I spent worrying about your future, while I was working 18-hour days building treatments that had extended the lives of over 100,000 cancer patients. And the conversations where we tried to encourage you to consider more stable career options were happening while I was being courted by every major pharmaceutical company in the world. David looked like he was going to be sick. Alina, do you realize what this means? What does it mean, David? It means that while I was learning about business theory, you were actually building a business that's worth more than most Fortune 500 companies. It means, I said gently, that there are different paths to success, and mine just didn't look like what our family expected success to look like. The graduation ceremony was winding down, but our conversation was just beginning. Around us, families were celebrating their graduates' achievements, taking photos, and making plans for celebration dinners. But the Vasquez family was dealing with a revelation that had turned everything they thought they knew about success, achievement, and family dynamics upside down. I have so many questions, Mom said finally. I'm sure you do. But the biggest one is, are you happy? I mean, really happy with the choices you've made. I thought about the letter from the mother in Ohio. I thought about the research papers that would be published next month, showing how our treatments were extending life expectancy for pancreatic cancer patients. I thought about the team of brilliant scientists who worked in my labs, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in personalized medicine. I'm happy, Mom. I'm doing work that matters, with people I respect, solving problems that actually need solving. I couldn't ask for more than that, even if it meant letting your family think you were failing. That's the part I'm sorry about. I should have found a better way to help you understand what I was building. David was quiet for a long moment, then finally spoke. Alina, I just gave a speech about family success stories and traditional achievement. I heard, and I basically excluded you from the family narrative of success. You did. While you were sitting there knowing that you're actually the most successful person in our entire family. Success isn't a competition, David. Your MBA is a real achievement. Your career in corporate finance has value. None of that changes, because my path led somewhere different. But I dismissed your path. In front of hundreds of people, I called it unconventional and implied it wasn't real success. You did, but you did it because you didn't know what my path had actually led to. Now you do. And now I feel like an ass. You feel like a brother who was working with incomplete information. There's a difference. The crowd was starting to disperse as families headed off to their celebration plans. Our family sat in the emptying auditorium, trying to process a revelation that had changed everything. So what happens now? Dad asked. I mean with us. Do we get to be proud of you retroactively? I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had all day. Dad, you get to be proud of me whenever you want. But maybe next time, we could talk about what I'm actually doing before deciding whether it's worth being proud of. Deal, Mom said immediately. Though I reserve the right to worry about you for non-career related reasons, like whether you're eating enough and getting proper sleep. That's fair. Mother's privilege. David was still staring at the podium where he'd given his speech about family success. Alina, can I ask you something? Of course. When I was up there talking about established channels of achievement and traditional measures of success. Yes? Were you sitting there thinking I was a complete idiot? I was sitting there thinking you were my brother, giving a speech about what success looked like from your perspective, which is valid, even if it's not the only perspective. But you must have wanted to correct me, to stand up and say something. Honestly, I was more interested in hearing what you had to say. Your perspective on success is just as real as mine, even if our paths have been different. Even though your path led to revolutionizing cancer treatment, while mine led to an MBA. David, your path led to you standing on that stage and inspiring a room full of people to pursue excellence in business. That's not nothing. That's not small. That matters too. The auditorium was nearly empty now, but we sat in our row, finally having the conversation we probably should have had years ago. I have one more question, Mom said. This donation to the business school. How much was it? I smiled. Enough to fund the new center and create endowments for 50 students per year. Alina, Dad said slowly, that's got to be $12 million. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shocks. This wasn't surprise. This was awe. You donated $12 million to David's business school, Mom said. I donated $12 million to create opportunities for the next generation of entrepreneurs who want to use business principles to solve health problems. The fact that it's David's school is just a bonus. A bonus? David repeated. My sister just donated $12 million to my business school as a bonus. I donated it because I believe in what the center will accomplish. But I admit, there was something satisfying about having Dean Morrison make the announcement right after your speech about family success stories. David started laughing. Alina, you just totally upstaged my graduation. I really didn't mean to. Yes, you did. And it was brilliant. Okay. Maybe I meant to a little bit. More than a little bit. You timed that perfectly. Sometimes, I said, grinning at my brother, the best response to being excluded from the success narrative is to quietly demonstrate that you've already written your own. And with that, the Vasquez family headed off to celebrate, not just David's graduation, but also the discovery that success comes in many forms, even when we're too stubborn to recognize it.